Today, the world faces numerous new challenges. Humans have always faced challenges. Life, for the most part, for our ancestors was short, tough, and violent. In fact, there were several periods in our ancient history when the human race almost became extinct. Through plagues, several ice ages, frequent wars, and dreadful famines, enough of our ancestors survived that humans prospered, multiplied, expanded, and industrialized. Here in the 21st century, the human race faces a whole new set of problems. In the past 60 years, the world's population has doubled, exacerbating many problems and creating great challenges, including starvation and malnutrition, extreme poverty, economic turmoil, warfare, migration, and of course, climate change. Today, people across the world are more connected than ever. The global village, first discussed 60 years ago by Marshall McLuhan, is a reality today. We are all connected electronically, aeronautically, and economically. To paraphrase an old saying, when somebody sneezes in New York, people catch cold in Rio and Mexico City. This is not just true from an epidemiological standpoint. It applies to politics, religion, economics, and the climate. A global perspective is more essential than ever. Leaders must understand we are all together on the spaceship near the edge of the Milky Way. There is no national environment. The rising oceans occur everywhere, not just in the country that produced the greenhouse gases. Today, social movements spread across the globe with the speed of the internet. Diseases are unaware that they are crossing an international border. When a recession strikes in one large country, it is felt by everyone in the world. There is no more local. We are all on one spaceship headed into an uncertain future. The problems of industrial and automotive pollution threaten to crash spaceship Earth before we can move to renewable resources of energy. Generations from now, people would say, how could people have burned coal and oil in the air we breathe? As the most advanced economies are transitioning to wind and solar and other renewable energy sources, poor countries are rapidly increasing their industrialization and the consumption of fossil fuels like coal, gas, and oil. The increase in world population, interconnection, transportation, industrialization, and the burning of carbon-based fuels has created a whole new set of exceedingly serious challenges. Aside from the threat of nuclear war, which has faced humankind for over 70 years, climate change is the greatest existential threat on Earth. There is no real debate about climate change in the scientific community. The world is becoming warmer, stormier, and more ferocious. There's also no serious debate about the primary cause of climate change, the release of carbon and other greenhouse gases from the massive burning of fossil fuels over the last century. As we have learned from other ITC programs, global climate change is real and different from past shifts in the climate. It is largely human-caused. There is ample evidence of this fact. However, despite the denial of some leaders in government and business, climate change is a fact, and the world must collaborate to avoid climactic catastrophe. Climate change is more than a future threat. Numerous early negative effects are occurring today. For illustration purposes, I will concentrate on the issues of the Americas. Coastal communities in California, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana in the United States, and coastal Brazil, and much of the Yucatan coast in Mexico are experiencing coastal flooding from sea rise during high tides that they never experienced in the past. Many states and cities are preparing for future evacuations of the coastline due to sea rise, as king tides already flood their streets and towns. Other clear warning signs are here. An iceberg 4 times the size of Rio de Janeiro broke off from Antarctica during the summer of 2017. According to Science Daily, Greenland has lost over 4 trillion tons of ice since 1995, and the rate of melting is increasing. Presently, Greenland is the biggest contributor to sea rise. Climate change is much faster in the Arctic and the Antarctic, resulting in massive melting in Greenland, Alaska, and Antarctica. But that is not the only cause of sea rise. Warmer water actually takes up more volume than cold water, and oceans have only one way to go, up. Across the globe, massive storms are becoming more common. In the past 2 years, El Nino-fueled storms, fueled by climate change, have devastated huge areas of Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay, and displaced tens of thousands of residents. Pacific hurricanes in association with El Nino are larger than ever. Hurricane Patricia 2 years ago in Mexico was the biggest hurricane ever recorded in the Western Hemisphere at that time. Just 2 months ago, Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma devastated Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas after gaining energy from hot, climate-fueled Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico waters. Harvey resulted in the most rainfall ever recorded in the United States, and hundreds of miles of flooding that may become the new normal for the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean region. Which countries in Latin America are best and worst prepared for climate change? The World Economic Forum monitors 45 different indicators to measure the vulnerability across categories such as food systems, water availability, infrastructure, and human health, along with economic, governance, and social readiness. Together, they give an indication of a country's overall climate change resilience. None of the countries in Latin America are extremely well prepared, although Chile, Uruguay, Costa Rica, and Mexico are better prepared than most countries. At great risk are Haiti, Guyana, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Belize, Venezuela, Cuba, and Ecuador. According to the World Bank, some 14 million Latin Americans live in areas of high risk of climate change. Research by the University of Cantabria in Spain and the University of California, Santa Cruz suggests that 9 million people in the Caribbean and Latin America will experience coastal flooding in the next 70 years. Projections from scientific organizations suggest that over 500,000 Latin American residents will be coastal refugees from sea rise in the next 3 decades. Action on climate change is more than a matter of environmental ethics. It is a matter of survival. According to the United Nations, displacement linked to climate change is not a future hypothetical. It is a current reality. Since 2008, an average annual of over 21 million people have been forcibly displaced from their homes by sudden weather-related hazards, including storms, wildfires, floods, and extreme temperatures. In addition, slowly developing hazards related to climate change, such as drought and coastal erosion and sea rise, have caused the displacement of hundreds of thousands more. Virtually all scientists agree that climate change, along with other hazards, will dramatically increase displacement. The United States Defense Department has predicted that climate change will substantially increase refugees, as well as political and military instability. It is not only coasts that are threatened from sea rise and larger storms. Temperature increases may make parts of Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas virtually uninhabitable. Mexico City, far from the coast and high in the mountains, is one of many major urban centers suffering from climate change. According to the New York Times, water has been an issue in Mexico for hundreds of years. Today, Mexico City keeps drilling deeper for more water, depleting the aquifer, weakening the ancient clay beds on which the Aztecs first built the city, and causing massive subsidence. And climate change is making the matter worse. Increased drought and heat, which causes more evaporation, results from climate change. The insatiable thirsts of all giant urban centers like Mexico City increases the global demand for water, making deeper drilling more expensive and accelerating the city's quality of life problems. In most large cities, water supply reservoirs and aquifers are being drained at an alarming rate, and their transportation, water, and sewage infrastructure needs urgent repair and upgrades. Soil movement and fractures under old buildings is not uncommon, as is seen in the graphic shown of a Mexico City neighborhood. The environmental and climate change issues of the Americas can also be seen today all over the world. Without a doubt, a global response is urgently needed. Every nation, large and small, must do what it can to prevent climate change. Conversion from carbon-based fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas to renewable sources like solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal energy sources is essential. According to the World Bank, Latin America has great potential for renewable energy, particularly in Mexico and South America. Hydroelectricity already plays an important role in the energy mix, but this is not equal across the countries of Latin America. While hydroelectric dams generate 100% of the electricity in Paraguay, and nearly 100% of Costa Rica's energy is from renewable sources, most Caribbean countries continue to depend strongly on oil. For example, 89.9% of electricity in Jamaica is generated from fossil fuels. But most of Latin America lies near the equator, between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, with abundant year-round sunshine, making it a very friendly region for solar energy. Latin America produces over half of its energy from renewable resources, compared to less than a quarter for the rest of the world. It is a leader in renewables and has capacity for much more. According to the New York Times, quote, as Latin America embraces greener energy sources, government officials and industry executives in the region have expressed a sense of confusion, even bewilderment, with the Trump federal government administration's decision in the U.S. to withdraw from climate change commitments contained in the Paris Agreement, declare an end to the war on coal, and take aim at American environmental regulations, unquote. Fortunately, more enlightened city and states governments in the U.S. have their own independent climate goals, planning to reach 100% renewable power by 2050. Dozens of cities in California alone are exceeding the guidelines of the Paris Climate Accord in reducing carbon emissions. One major source of renewable power is wind. Denmark now produces 45% of its power from wind, and on some days produces 140% of its own energy needs from wind, exporting excess power to Norway, Sweden, and Germany. Spain and Portugal now produce over 20% of their power from wind, and Germany produces 10%. In the U.S., the state of Iowa produces 30% of its electricity from wind. The United States and China produce more wind energy than any other countries in the world, although each derives only about 5% of their power from wind. According to the New York Times, Chile plans to produce 90% of its energy from wind, solar, geothermal, and hydropower by 2050. And its potential is even greater with abundant wind on its Pacific coast and the sun-drenched Atacama Desert to the north for solar energy. Chile has little fossil fuel, and the country's rapidly expanding green energy expansion has actually reduced the cost of electricity that has turned a nation that depended on importing coal and oil into a model for renewable energy that may even export power to its neighbors. Chile is also producing solar panels, not just for rooftop solar and the large solar fields in the Atacama Desert, but for export as well. Hundreds of windmills in the northern desert along Chile's 2,600-mile coast now feed into the nation's power grid. Chilean geothermal plants generate round-the-clock power, even when the winds are light and nighttime generation of solar power stops. Mexico has made good progress too. It plans to generate 35% of its electricity from renewable sources by 2024 and 50% by 2050, up 21% from 21% in 2017. Given that the wind from abundant Pacific sunshine in Mexico could become a renewable energy powerhouse in the near future, practically all countries in Latin America, including the Caribbean, have the potential to become world leaders in alternative energy. This could stimulate their economies, reduce global warming, and prevent importation of large amounts of dirty fuel. Meanwhile, saving oil for manufacturing and lubrication is a wise, long-term economic move. How can our global society survive the increasingly common threats and damages caused by our industrial pollution and continued environmental degradation? Every country, city, business, and individual must realistically prepare for the inevitable climate change that lies ahead. Even our best efforts at reducing carbon emissions can only slow global warming and climate change. The key is to make such increases small and not the terrible, large increases that could create a global catastrophe. Throughout the world, infrastructure upgrades are needed for a variety of reasons. Bridges, highways, schools, jails, and sewage treatment plants are crumbling in many countries, including the United States. As countries rebuild themselves, all new infrastructure projects need to be climate change resilient. According to the World Economic Forum, building climate resilience into infrastructure standards is essential. Quote, much of the world's infrastructure is being built using approaches that are several decades old, unquote. New thinking needs to be employed to build a more climate-resistant infrastructure. All new construction must be able to stand up to the increased rain, wind, drought, and sea level that climate change is sure to bring. While this will divert resources from other important needs, such spending could be a major economic stimulus to many countries around the world. All future construction should avoid river basins that are prone to flooding. Even more critical is avoiding new construction on coastal plains. According to the World Economic Forum, all future climate-resistant construction should account for sea rise, high tides, and storm surge from larger storms. For example, the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean recommends that nations in Latin America invest annually 6.2% of their GDP in infrastructure in the next 4 years, or approximately $320 billion per year, every year, from 2017 to 2021. The report suggests that such expenditures will actually save money, since when infrastructure has to be rebuilt, it is vastly more expensive, taking money away from other social priorities like education, research, defense, and health. Countries that have low-lying areas should develop evacuation plans for extensive locations around storm-prone areas. Climate change will bring higher seas and bigger storms, so both temporary evacuations and permanent abandonment will be necessary. Some cities here in California have found that abandonment of the half-mile nearest the coast is the most cost-effective way of dealing with sea rise. Sea barriers using sand, mud, and seawalls are generally not economically or logistically feasible. Only in the most vital areas, like major coastal cities, are barriers like dikes, dams, and seawalls viable solutions. Large storms and future sea level rise can overcome seawalls with catastrophic results. Dumping sand and mud on beaches is at best a short-term solution that often actually hastens coastal erosion. Instead of seawall and sand piles, natural barriers to sea level rise should be restored. The Nature Conservancy's research suggests that massive planting of mangroves is one defense against sea rise. Mangroves exist in the transition zone between water and land and can provide great stabilization for beaches and coastlines. Over time, mangroves build soil at the interface between the sea and the land. But development threatens mangroves, and countries must prevent additional shoreline development that destroys these vital plants. Instead, planting of mangroves for protection and enjoyment by kayakers and canoers can be a wonderful marriage of conservation and recreation. However, this must be combined with dramatic limitations on carbon emissions to halt global warming. Already, sea rise and large waves are threatening some existing mangrove forests. Of course, the best ways to prevent beach erosion is to let streams and rivers flow freely into the sea. In the past, rivers provided a continuous flow of sand, rock, and sediment that restored and even created beaches. Unfortunately, many dams prevent the free flow of water and sediment, thereby depleting the beach. The flow of fresh sand can create coastal barriers to storm surge. Moreover, older dams are mostly filled with sediment and no longer function as viable reservoirs or pump storage facilities. Hydroelectric power is carbon-free and much better for generating energy than coal, oil, or gas. But hydroelectric is really a stopgap solution. Unless a dam is vital and irreplaceable in the delivery of fresh water or hydroelectric power, countries and cities should consider dismantling old dams. Free-flowing streams will restore beaches, protect the coast, and resuscitate fish population who use rivers in their reproductive and life cycle. West Coast salmon in particular need free-flowing rivers to spawn and produce the next generation of seafood. Only necessary dams should be retained and then combined with fish ladders and hatcheries to replenish the dwindling supply of fish. As hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, and floods are expected to increase, emergency plans are more important than ever, particularly in vulnerable areas. Every layer of government, all businesses, and every family individual should develop an emergency response plan to respond resiliently to major events and disasters. All the climate models suggest the storms of various types will be larger and more common, making emergency plans even more important. All plans should be accompanied by drills and public information campaigns to make sure the plan is ready to go. We have the power to slow climate change and to prepare for the worst-case scenarios. Fortunately, most government leaders recognize the importance of eliminating fossil fuels and preparing for the inevitable changes that lie ahead. Without doubt, a truly global response to this problem of sustainability and human survival is essential and vital, particularly for our future generations. Regardless of political or religious views, this is a call that should unite everyone. Anything less is unacceptable. Thank you.